All right, I think we are good to go here. All right, hello everybody. Welcome back to another video here on my channel. My name is Hector Acuna. This is my second live stream that I'm sort of exploring and testing out this format for YouTube and as a way to just have a more casual discussion about my work and some of my ideas and my process and materials, influences, those sort of ideas and topics. So I'm really excited to go back and look at one of the portfolios on my website today. We're going to be looking at the 2017 through 2019 portfolio. And if you have any questions during the live stream, feel free to add those into the chat. I think I should be able to see any comments or questions that come in. So if you're watching this after the recording, feel free to reach out with questions or comment in the video on YouTube. So anyway, before I get into the portfolio, I did want to take a few minutes and just share an announcement with everyone here and just introduce a book that I'm working on right now. I don't really have a script, so I'm just sort of going off the top of my head here. But if you're familiar with some of my plein air painting work and practice, then you've probably heard me talk about some of the plein air zines that I've made. So here's an example of the first zine that I published back in 2021. And this was the first iteration. It just was kind of this experiment to explore kind of a photo book, a little photo art book here. And it was a lot of fun to make. I kind of concentrated on reproductions of the paintings that I made outdoors on location during the year of 2021, during that first kind of plein air season that I participated in events. And then going into last year, or at the end of 2022, I wanted to make another book, kind of like volume 2. And I had a lot of new ideas for things that I could include in the book. So volume 2 is like 3 times as long as volume 1. You can just see side by side how much extra material and information I included. So this one has a lot of photo reproductions. I incorporated a lot more close-up details of paintings, and as you can kind of see, there's also quite a bit of text. So I wanted to share a lot more stories about the paintings and the places that I was really fortunate to travel to. I tried my best to recall, conversations I had with people and just some of those really exciting and interesting moments that I got to share with people that live in these places that I painted. One of my favorite things that I added to the second volume that was not included in the first volume was a section in the back of the book that showed some of my thumbnail drawings for some of the paintings actually that are in the book. So this was a really fun addition and something that I'll be doing again for the third volume, which is what I'll talk about right now. So I was hoping to have the book already done by this point in 2024, but I have a lot of different projects happening right now, and I'm a one-man business artist, and there's just a lot of different hats that I'm wearing throughout the year, so it's really hard for me to predict how long something is going to take to produce. But I just wanted to share with you today the pre-order sale of the third volume of my plein air book / zine series. So if you're interested, you can purchase a copy of the book during the pre-order where it's currently on sale. It's $5 off. So volume 3 is going to be $30 a copy, and it's probably going to be close to the same size as volume 2. And it's going to include all of the paintings I made outdoors in 2023 and some other new exciting chapters that I'm working on currently. It's just taking a while to flesh out a lot of those pages. But this is where you can pre-order a copy of the book, and it's hard to tell how long the pre-order is going to stay open, but for the next couple of weeks, I think it's safe to say that you'll be able to order the book and save a couple dollars. The other option that I'm trying out this year is what I'm calling the backer option for the book. So when you go to purchase a copy, there's a little pull-down menu here that asks you to select either to back the zine or to not back the zine. And if you choose to back the zine, that's going to bump the price up to its normal price, which is $30. However, it also is going to mean that your name is going to be featured in the book at the end of the book as a supporter of my work and as a supporter of the book. So that's just kind of a new option I'm trying out. I've had maybe 8 or 10 people sign up to back the book so far, and I just wanted to share that with you here in the video. And depending on how that goes this year, it's pretty likely that I'll continue to do the backing option if I choose to make more zines in the future. And I'm already sort of planning to open this window a lot longer. So for example, volume 4, the pre-order I might try to set up here in the next couple of months and then promote that through the rest of the year and give people that opportunity to kind of back the book, almost like a Kickstarter project. So everything is just right off of my website, in the shop on my website. And then, of course, you don't have to back the zine. You can just choose not to include your name and pre-order it for the $25 on sale. And then just really quickly here, the other books, if you're interested, I have copies available right now that can ship as soon as possible. So if you don't have either of these copies and you would like one, you can also order both of those books here right off of my shop as well. Volume 1 is $20 a copy and Volume 2 is $30 a copy. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know. Just as a reminder, I do offer free U.S. shipping in the continental 48 states on orders that are $100 or more. So if you're going to be buying both of these copies, keep that in mind. If you back the third zine, that'll bring you pretty close to that $100 free shipping option. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. But you can also find originals and reproductions, some studio paintings, and plein air paintings that are framed and available for purchase. So while I'm talking about the zine for 2023, so it's volume 3, I did want to share with you a couple of the pages that I'm currently working on for this third volume of the zine. So something that I did this year over the spring of 2023, technically, I did a bunch of these color chart pages with my palette, and this is something I'm going to be including in the third volume of the zine, just as kind of a fun reference, and I think they're just visually really interesting to look at and kind of exciting. So I wanted to include some of these pages, and I also talk about the process of making those pages. The third volume is going to talk a little bit about the materials that I like to use outdoors, and just show some of the process ideas, whether that's canvas making or frame building. So I'm trying to include some of that process imagery as well in the book. And a lot of these pages are full print pages, same size as volumes 1 and 2, but we're looking at the pages. We're looking at these pages right now in just like a viewfinder on my computer. And I'm going to also do a few short kind of essays in the book, just thoughts on painting or process or framing, maybe a little bit of like some of my philosophies on painting in plein air. That's honestly partially what's taking so long, is that I'm really trying to narrow down what I want to talk about and how I want to write about some of these ideas and topics. So anyway, these are a few examples of the pages that I've designed so far. The text on a lot of these pages is still going to change, but the layout is pretty much what you're seeing right now. And then the middle of the book is going to show a lot of the actual reproductions of paintings. So it's a very clean kind of art book style portfolio that you're going to have in this book as well. But anyway, that's just kind of a quick preview of Volume 3. So like I said, that volume is going to be available as a pre-order for a limited time. Obviously, it will still be available for the full price once the pre-order closes. So if you have any questions about that, just let me know. Okay, anyway, that's enough of a plug on the plein air zines. Now we can get into what the video and stream is actually about, which is my portfolio from 2017 through 2019. So I'm just going to, again, project images right off of my website. So if you're interested in looking at some of these paintings on a separate screen and you really want to look at some of the details, I highly recommend and encourage you to go visit my website, Acuna Arts, which is actually listed here in the video under my my screen there. But anyway, so this is the portfolio 2019 through 2017. It kind of doesn't make sense the way it's formatted. The reason I'm starting with the more recent year is because at the top of the page, you're looking at paintings that were made in 2019, and then as you scroll down, you're working your way towards 2017. So to me, it makes more sense to have more recent things at the top of the pages as opposed to the other way around. That way, as you scroll, you're kind of moving backwards in time. But for the sake of this video, it makes more sense to start, at an older period. So we're going to scroll down and just start talking about some of these paintings. So just to give you some quick context on the year 2017, I was living in Arizona at the start of 2017. So if you watched the first live stream, I talked a little bit about this bicycle tour that I took with my now wife, Megan. And we rode our bicycles from Wisconsin to Arizona, basically from my mom's house to her parents' house. And once we made it to Arizona, we stayed with her parents for six to 8 months or so. And it was during that time that I applied to graduate school. And I didn't talk about this in the last video, but when I applied to grad school, I was looking at 3 universities in the Midwest and then 1 school that was out east at Rutgers University in New Jersey. The other 3 schools I applied to were the University of Minnesota, and then I think it was the University of Iowa has a really good painting program as well. And then the 3rd school or the 4th school that I applied to was Michigan State University. And I've told this story before, I think in other interviews and videos and things, but I'll just quickly retell that period. I had applied to those programs, and then within 2 weeks, I heard from 3 of them that I was not picked. About a month went by, and I was starting to think, well, I'm probably not going to go to grad school. And then I get a call from one of the faculty members, Teresa Dunn, from Michigan State. I didn't recognize the number, so I just let it go to voicemail. But when I listened to the voicemail, she was very excited to offer me a spot in their grad program. And, it ended up being kind of the perfect fit for me. And I'm really honored and happy and grateful that I had that opportunity to go to grad school at Michigan State. So anyway, that's a little bit of context of my life at that time. And I had moved back to Wisconsin for the summer with my mom and then kind of geared up and prepared to move to Michigan with Megan. So in 2017, in the summer, we moved to Lansing, Michigan, and ended up living there for 4 years. So these 3 years that I'll talk about, 2017, 18, and 19, we were living in Lansing, Michigan during those years. So this painting I'm looking at right now was a painting that I made during the first semester of grad school. So that painting was one of the first ones that I kind of had finished during grad school. It's a little hard to tell, but there's quite a bit of obscuring through layering of paint in this painting, and there's quite a bit of rough scumbling that I incorporated in this painting. So that was something that I was really kind of interested in at that time, was this idea of layering the medium and pushing things back in space, right? This illusion that we're unable to see certain information in the painting, almost like hiding certain aspects of the image. So what I liked about this painting was that, these socks at the bottom in the foreground, they initially feel like they're just sort of out of place and they're isolated. But the longer we look at the painting, we can start to pick out some other shapes that feel connected to the socks and to the feet. So this idea of absence and presence was pretty apparent to this painting and some of the paintings I started making in grad school. For a little bit of context, when I was in undergrad, I was dealing with a lot of ideas that I talked about in the last video with family history and ethnicity and belonging and place and community and just, stereotype and some of those ideas. And that's where I sort of continued the conversation in grad school. So with this painting in particular, I'm sorry, I have to sneeze all of a sudden. I was sort of excavating some of the motifs that I felt were very relevant to me and my family story and the way I was starting to make sense of my relationship with my father, who for the majority of my life was incarcerated. And that's a pretty important part of the stories that I kind of explore in my work in the studio. Even today, I think some of that is still relevant. But, growing up, we used to receive these manila envelopes from him in prison, and sometimes they would have drawings in them or letters or just other bits of information. And the manila envelope kind of became this motif that I explored in my work during grad school, especially my first year of grad school. And I was thinking a lot about line and cages and restrictions, or this idea of alienation and distance and closeness and just the tension of those ideas. So that was sort of the tone of my work going into grad school. And that was kind of the reason I wanted to go to grad school, to be honest, was to really push my work and to really try to spend a little bit more time considering the importance and the intention behind what I wanted to paint and what I wanted to make. And I was talking with an artist in Indianapolis earlier, not this year, but at the end of last year, and we were talking about this, what do you gain from grad school versus undergrad? And I said something that I'd heard other artists say that resonated with me, and just kind of repeated this idea that I think for me too, grad school was this time to make sense of why I make paintings, as opposed to how I make paintings, where in undergrad I felt like I was just learning how to paint, and I was learning how to explore the materials and find, aspects of my visual voice as a painter and image maker in ways that made sense to me and really clicked for me. So grad school was this time where I really wanted to ask some more important questions. And I'm going to apologize because some of these paintings are not in chronological order. This is a painting I made in 2017, but it was actually made in Arizona before I moved back to the Midwest. So this was a painting that I finished at the start of 2017, I think in March or February, potentially, maybe even in April. And it's a relatively large painting. I think this was 40 inches by 40 inches or somewhere in that range. And this was a painting that I created based off of a digital collage using that Autodesk sketchbook program. And I was sort of playing with the removal of information and the emphasizing of information. I mentioned in the last stream this sort of headspace of, almost like a DJ would change the volume of channels and really think about composition with different elements, right, in music, where something gets really loud or really intense, and then maybe they mask that under something else that becomes very quiet and maybe very bass heavy. I kind of started to feel like painting was like that at this time when I was working from digital collages, because it's so easy to make very quick decisions in digital programs, highlighting a certain shape or mapping out a certain part of an image and changing its chroma or changing its hue, and those sort of adjustments were really easy to do digitally, and then I could just paint right off of that reference. So this was a painting I made from images that were in my grandmother's photo archive that I had scanned or made reproductions of digitally. So anyway, I liked the mood and the tension in this painting between the figure of the child and the presence of alcohol in the painting. And I think I called this painting Sponge, if I remember correctly. This was another painting I made right around the same time in Arizona. This was like 30 by 40 or maybe 36 by 40 or somewhere in there. And this was also made from photos from my family's photo album archive. And this is an image of my grandmother when my mom was growing up. And again, I sort of removed a lot of the context, and I was really thinking about pieces of moments being fractured and being recontextualized. I think that was a very important theme that I was pushing in the work at that time without even really being that aware of it. And I think later on, as we'll talk about through grad school, some of those decisions that feel very formal, right? Like, oh, I'm just going to change the format or the form of this image. It can have a very conceptual impact on the idea of the work and how we understand or interpret the work. So recontextualizing a figure or a chair or a flower or a decorative element, there's a lot of power when we do that, and we juxtapose it with something else that is unrelated, maybe, or we find associations through that combining of disparate contexts, right? I think recontextualizing something is that process. So that was what I was doing right before grad school, and just being really open-ended with the palettes and the way I was painting and the layering of the paint. And in the last live stream, I talked about painting out of undergrad. Some of those portraits I was doing were very expressive and almost experimental in the way that I was using the paint and applying the paint and thinking about the character of the paint on the surface as its own, place to develop meaning or to develop an idea. And in here, I'm looking at a little bit of impasto in some areas and very washy, diluted paint in other areas. So there's quite a bit of variety in the surface of this painting. And I still have both of those paintings. I haven't sold them. I didn't really exhibit them anywhere. Regretfully, to be honest, I kind of wish I would have exhibited these paintings in a few more exhibitions and shows. But anyway, now we're kind of back in the grad school first semester portfolio. This is very similar to the first painting I had talked about and shown, where I'm looking at paint as this veil to hide information or to make something seem less explicit or make something seem more distant from myself as the viewer, or even just as a way of discovering new subject matter and new forms of representation or definition, right? Like I saw the painting as this very realized figurative portrait from a photograph that we had of, I think it was my brother at a, maybe it was at a party or something when he was a toddler, and he's looking back at the person that took the photo, and there's something kind of domineering about that perspective, being up so high and looking down on someone, especially a child looking back up at the viewer. And it just felt like this sort of, this figure that was trapped, right? Or this figure that was, stuck in this pit. That's sort of how I started to see the image and sort of started to process that idea, that visual idea. But anyway, I continued to kind of layer and push the painting and kept reinventing the feeling of the painting with different layers of color and then text and then mark making and shape. I mean, if we look closely here, there's quite a bit of atmosphere and variety in mark. And I forget what I had written on this canvas now, and some sort of retelling of a story maybe, or an idea that crossed my mind partway through the process of making the painting. And I don't do that very often, where I'll incorporate text in the paintings, which it's been a long time since I've really pushed that element in the work. One of the things I really loved visually about this painting, which, spoiler alert, I guess, this painting was painted over. I don't have this painting anymore. It doesn't exist in this form anymore. So all we have is this image and the story of remembering the process and all that stuff. But I really love the way that this hand turned out that was holding, I don't know if it was like a potato chip or a pickle or just some sort of ambiguous object. And I started to push the horns and the tails and these sort of like tentacle-like forms, which just gave, to me, it gave the painting more of a sinister feeling, I guess. Now that I'm looking at it again, years after I had made it, I don't know. It's definitely hard to tell whether this painting has more of a positive or kind of a negative connotation to it. But I kind of like paintings that sit in that middle ground anyways. All right, and now we're looking at some paintings that we're digging into a little bit more invention, or this painting anyway. I don't know what's going to come after this painting, but this was one that was inspired by my memories of being the mascot, which I talked a little bit about this personal history in the last live stream. Growing up in middle school and high school, I volunteered very willingly to be our school's mascot with a few other peers at different grade levels. And I think in total, I probably was a mascot for like 4 years, if I had to guess, between middle and high school. And, it was usually for basketball games that I would dress up in this, costume. And this particular helmet mask was meant to represent the one that I wore in middle school. And if you watched the last live stream, I was talking about what it meant to be in a public space and to be an entertainer or a performer under the mask of a physical barrier, right, that changes your identity in some way and allows you to express ideas or to express humor without the threat of being, ridiculed potentially by your appearance or your name. And, again, a lot of these things, like, it's almost like psychoanalyzing childhood a little bit here, but I look back on those memories and it really, they're a lot more influential than they felt they were at the time, and I think that the image of a mask and a mascot is very powerful when I look at paintings like this, and that idea of vulnerability versus safety and persona and some of these ideas definitely start to come to mind looking at this painting. But yeah, it was just kind of a one session painting on a panel. I think this is probably like 12 by 16, somewhere in that size. This was during the first semester of grad school. And I was really playing around with expression, and really shifting the format and the character of the body and the character of subject, and really trying to discover a palette and to discover a language of mark making and storytelling. I think a big component of a lot of my studio work is this idea of storytelling and the desire to, make sense of some kind of history, whether that's a personal history or a family history or more of a community-wide history, cultural history. Painting for me has been this way of posing ideas or thoughts or questions, and allowing the object of the painting to generate discussion or to generate a potential example of some idea, and this was a painting that was intended as a self-portrait. I think I painted my feet from the mirror, like observation. I was teaching a drawing class at this time, so I was spending a lot of time talking about working from observation and from life, and we were drawing from still lifes quite a bit in the classroom. So it was a very healthy time for my art practice. I felt like, I'm just going to pull open a new tab real quick. It was a very healthy time for me because I felt like I had this reignited interest in observation and pulling imagery and pulling ideas from direct observation, which it was before grad school, I think for me that was something that I'd kind of fallen away from. I started working from photographs and digital collages a lot more, and teaching a drawing class, it really improved my skills in painting and obviously in drawing, but thinking more about composition. And if you noticed in the last portfolio, I talked about a lot of the subject matter was a singular form, sort of floating in a nondescript context, or kind of an abstract, non-objective background. And the drawing class I taught really reminded me on the power of composition, and this idea of context, right? And really thinking about figures and subjects within a ground kind of space, right? And relating the subject to other forms opens up such a wider lens on storytelling that I was really kind of overlooking, I think, before I went to grad school. So some of that was starting to become more and more exciting to me during that first semester of grad school. This painting is, I think my mom has this painting actually, and this is like 30 inches by 24, I think, somewhere in that range. This is a painting on a wood panel that I made. But yeah, I think I gave it to her during grad school or shortly after grad school. And then this was a painting that I made on canvas. This is about 30 inches by 30 inches or 36 by 36. And this was a painting that I really, really enjoyed making, just from the surface quality, the palette, the way I was pushing the paint around on the canvas. A lot of those formal qualities were really exciting to kind of encounter in the process. And there was this really healthy balance between controlling the image and where I wanted the painting to go, with leaving my process very open-ended and trying to let the paint be a bit more autonomous and organic in the way that it was being applied on the surface of the canvas. So I was looking at a lot of Francis Bacon at that time, and I also, I think, was introduced to more artists in the Bay figurative movement out in California. So actually I brought in a few examples of artists that were very inspiring at that time, from that movement in particular. So I was looking at people like David Park, who I believe is the artist of this first image that I'm showing you at the bottom. And I was also looking at people like Richard Diebenkorn, who's kind of the big name that people talk about when they mention the Bay figurative movement. I also was looking at quite a bit of Nathan Oliveira, or Oliveira. I apologize, I don't remember how to pronounce his last name, but his figurative paintings were very inspiring to me at this time, and really the quality of mystery and ambiguity and character and emotion in his work really grounded my painting practice at that time. And I was learning so many new ways of painting and telling stories during that first year of grad school that I just felt like I was so satiated as an artist through inspiration and learning these new names to look at. And one of the best parts about being in grad school at Michigan State was having access to their library system, which was very well kept and well run and organized, but had a very substantial art book collection that you could rent from, and a lot of the names of artists that would come up in studio visits from faculty and visiting artists, those names of people like Carrie James Marshall and Jenny Saville and even more historic artists like Rembrandt and Matisse, and I could just go to the library and find really, really nice books to rent for like a month at a time, sometimes longer than that. And it was just one of the best parts about being a student at Michigan State was having access to that library. So, those Bay figurative artists were really, really influential to some of the ways I was painting and thinking about painting during my first year in grad school. So you can see where I'm pushing more of the viscosity of the medium and getting away from a very flat kind of glazing, smooth surface quality. And I wanted to employ more of the physicality of paint in my work and raise kind of new qualities in the images, where things maybe felt a little bit more physical or more volumetric, and just sort of allowed the ideas to just become a bit more diverse in the way that representation was working with some of these images. And some of these paintings were very small. Like this one, I think was around 6 by 6 inches on a little panel. Just become the barn house structure I just showed was I think maybe 8 by 10, maybe smaller. In the way so a lot of these were kind of like little experiments and studies, and I was playing with this form that was very organic. Some of these paintings were very small, kind of like the tentacles in that little that green painting I showed earlier. As this motif that was weaving its way in and out of forms and in and out of different paintings. Partially as a way to get to that feeling of is this a safe, is this a safe place, or is this a threatening, place, or is this figure a figure that I can trust? And that riding that line of feeling safe or feeling secure or understanding what you're looking at as a way to get to that exciting. I mean, obviously, when I look at Nathan's paintings here, I see some of those ideas of the unknown, right? The figure is, the identity is sort of stripped down and removed, and it becomes sort of this universal stand-in for the body and humanity and humans at large. And that really was inspiring to me as an artist at that time. I see some of those ideas. Here's another one of his paintings, and I also just fell in love with the way that he used paint and the way that he allowed paint to be its own physical thing in some of these works. Now, some of these might be Diebenkorn, some of these might be Oliveira's work, but I don't have names of them on the images here. I believe this is Nathan Oliveira's work. I also just fell in love with the way that and then here's a Diebenkorn. So a much brighter palette, more chromatic palette. I really love the way, and still do, the way that Diebenkorn flattens space and works more in terms of shape and thinking about composition as elements and forms that are separate but have a very kind of hyper-aware relationship to the rest of the painting, right? So the size of the figure in the room, to the horizon, where the head meets other forms behind the head. There's just this like tense feeling in a lot of his paintings where we're looking at figures in interior spaces, or even in his landscapes, and the way that he simplifies and reduces form into almost like these miniature abstract paintings. And that was something that was really inspiring for me at this time, where I came out of undergrad feeling very tied to representation and rendering as something that I did through the entire painting, whether it was top to bottom or left to right. Like, there wasn't as much variety with these big kind of thick, gestural moments in my paintings. And the first year and first semester of grad school, that was something that I was starting to push a bit more, was that looseness of mark and kind of towing the line of representation a little bit more towards abstraction, right? allowing rendering and allowing the description of what I'm painting to be a little bit more ambiguous and maybe even abbreviated or simplified, right? So there's things like in this little painting, I think I call this painting Turkey Boy. This is about, I think this is like an 8 by 12 inch painting. Again, very small, modest sized painting, kind of a sketch. It would be kind of cool to revisit some of these compositions and do them much larger. There's something satisfying still about the openness of the environment and the kind of softness of the atmosphere against the very rough and present, but also mysterious figure slash animal that's at the foreground here. And so part of the first semester of grad school, I remember I was doing a lot of reflection on my family's farm property. That's pretty obvious here when we look at shapes that are like chickens and turkeys and those things. But allowing myself to be a bit more playful with the way that I was incorporating those images and motifs, that was something that I wanted to really kind of open up a bit more in my practice and in my process. Also, I'm new to the streaming thing, and I just saw that my little window that was playing the live stream just to check to make sure things were working. I don't know if that was sharing the audio with you, so if it was, I apologize. I don't know if there was a delay happening there, but hopefully that wasn't a problem or an issue. But I have my screen muted now, so that shouldn't happen anymore. But anyway, this was a painting called Chicken Boy, and I was really interested in this kind of like this grotesque kind of gallows humor in the work. So part of that I think is coming through with the palette. It's a very rough and muted and just desolate kind of palette with a lot of these grays and moving into a very visceral and strange bodily kind of palette that's inside the form. I liked that sense of contrast in hue and in color and chroma. This was a pretty small painting too. I think this was maybe 10 by 10 inches or 8 by 8 inches. Here's a sheep painting. A lot of these are just from imagination or memory, right? It's sort of this combination of feeling and sensation and recalling images that I can remember seeing as a child, growing up, taking care of animals like sheep and chickens, and that sense of proximity and space and feeling an atmosphere were really at the forefront of what I wanted to explore. And then there's also just this sense of simplicity and reducing the form down to its most basic principles and elements was really exciting to think about at that time too. And now this painting was inspired by real stories of growing up and dealing with predators that would come and attack our livestock. And we had a very small hobby farm where I grew up. My mom really was interested in raising small animals, and we didn't do like 4-H. We didn't show the animals. We didn't really farm them out for any kind of food processing needs. For the most part, it was just for us. I mean, we would sell lambs to like Greek restaurants and Greek families that had restaurants. I remember that, but otherwise, a lot of it was just for the experience. And I'm really grateful that was part of my childhood. Now, if you would have asked me growing up if I loved living on a farm, I probably would have said no, just because there were a lot of chores that we would have to do seasonally growing up. And I'm don't get the wrong impression here, like I had friends in school that were living on real like big production farms, and like my list of chores is nothing compared to theirs. But there were times where we're like shoveling out manure in the basement of our barn, and it was hot in the summer, and just the weight of that those shavings were just a serious workout, and as a kid, it's like you want to be doing other things, so now that I am an adult and I have time to look back on that experience, I feel very fortunate because it taught me so many things about just appreciating collaboration and community and responsibility for animals and for life. This painting is kind of about that very raw and very what's the word I'm trying to think of, blunt idea of life being precious, and seeing death and seeing such a violent death like the opening of carcasses on our family's farm in our back fields was pretty alarming and pretty shocking, as a kid growing up to just see that like raw power of nature and of the life cycle right in front of me. It's like it was a pretty influential aspect to our childhood, these moments where things like this would happen. And I wanted to make a very small painting kind of about that idea and about that feeling. And again, you can see some of the influence of gestural mark making and very just visceral paint quality at the forefront of my process at this time. And also this idea of like economy and not overworking the surface and allowing the simplicity of reducing information to be where a lot of the weight and power comes from, So some of those artists that I was talking about in the Bay Figurative group really inspired that idea for me in grad school, and it allowed me to learn different ways of painting and of using the variety of oil paints, viscosity, as a way to shift the tone in the work, and to really discover mark making and to discover beautiful passages in painting, that you can't really predict them. You only see them when you're at that point in the process. And the more you think this way and the more you engage in that open-endedness of responding to what else can the painting say, or what else can the painting do, or what happens if I do this, or what if I just put this really dark muted color in the middle of this massive red? What is that going to look like? What is that going to feel like? The hard part is knowing when to leave it, and when to step away and allow that moment of the process to be the thing that you share with the world, and that was a big learning experience for me in grad school, was allowing myself to just be comfortable with like that this is done, this is a finished idea, this is a finished image, and there's a lot here that I want to share with people, and I want to put out into my community. And these artists that I'm talking about in the Bay Figurative movement were very inspiring for some of those ideas. Here's another Diebenkorn interior scene, so I was looking at a lot of his big, simplifying of space and shapes during this time. This is a very small, like 4x4 inch or 5x5 inch tiny little painting. And I've kind of hung on to it in my portfolio for a few reasons. One of the things being the playfulness of surface and of shape in this painting was really eye-opening and really fun to interact with and engage with. You can see there are a few passages here where there's like a sanded surface quality and texture that's visible in the final, encounter with the painting, whereas other areas feel more opaque, that have been kind of glazed over. And I really love those moments where there's 2 or 3 layers of painting and process that we're looking at, but they're all kind of visible at the same time, right? So we have very thin, almost like pastel chalky paint that's very dry, and then we have areas that the oil cured and it has this beautiful sheen. And I love the that play on variety in the surface in this little painting. I also just thought it was a good example of trying something and maybe you know what it's going to do or say, but doing it anyway, with these red dots over the eyes. I just was like, maybe it's more interesting if I eliminate the identity of the eyes and that part of the face, and put in this very kind of stark and powerful color to shift the whole mood of this little sketch and this little painting. I was looking also at a lot of paintings by Alberto Giacometti, the Swiss artist who is known for these elongated figures, whether they're sculptures or paintings or drawings. And, I fell in love with that play on proportions with the figure, and what that does to the feeling of the body and the feeling of the subject, and this elongated, very narrow neck. I love how that plays off of the weight and the physical presence of the head in this painting. So that's another reason why I kind of hung on to it. And then here are some just almost like super inspired plays off of Nathan Oliveira's work, where we're looking at these lone, isolated figures, which for me, I also related to that image of the isolated figure at that time too. I mean, I look at my immediate family, and my mom and I share the same last name. My half siblings have a different last name, but we all grew up as one tribe of 4 people, and we're as close as family members can get, in my opinion. And the love that we have is so deep and strong between all of us. But from the outside, there are these kind of key differences about us. And I've thought about that a lot throughout my life, and how I feel about those ideas and how I feel about that sense of difference, and what that means, and how I relate to those distinctions between people, whether it's the last name, whether it's the physical features. There's things that just sort of differentiate us to someone who doesn't know us very well, and that's, I think, those interactions I've had in my life have what, created that internal kind of dialogue, with place and with relationships and, social relationships or social ideas and ethnic ideas and cultural ideas, and how we bring things together or separate them as a society, and how we deal with that as an individual, whether we feel like it's appropriate or inappropriate to do that at times. And I look at Nathan's work, and I that's where it takes me, is that idea of isolation or alienation, and things about us that pull us away from the tribe and pull us away from those we feel we are linked to or related to in some way. And, being the only child in my family that has the last name that I do has definitely created a lot of those moments for me where it's like, I feel like I'm kind of by myself in some ways, or having the same last name and the same first name as my father, who I talked about was, not in our family for, pretty much my whole life, also was another way to feel like I was separated from everything else or from everyone else in my family. And, a lot of those things, it's hard because it's not like somebody else made me feel this way or pushed that dialogue and conversation into my headspace and my psyche. It just happened organically over time. These ideas and these questions would come up. So as I was mining my childhood experiences and really trying to make sense of where I was living at the time, how I was being perceived by my community, and thinking about making images, that conversation kind of rehashed itself. And that's where I was feeling that sense of isolation or alienation with the body in some of these paintings, and what I liked about these very expressive paintings, and these are small, these are about 9 by 12 inches on paper, like I think Arches oil paper, is that through the mark making and the languages of the material, there are moments that feel very concrete and that feel very present and like there in front of us. And then there are moments that feel like they are in between, and maybe they're coming into focus or they're leaving focus. And I really liked that kind of liminal space. And that was a word that came up a lot for me in grad school, is this idea of liminality and being in between, or in this state of transformation where you're not here or there, you're between those two places. And I kind of identified with that term and that way of thinking in a lot of ways, because culturally, ethnically, depending on who I'm interacting with, I feel like I'm being brought into a certain group, or maybe being pushed out of a group. And this ambiguity of identity was something that really became more and more apparent in my own understanding of life and my own understanding of myself. And I think that's where I was really pushing myself in the work at this time in grad school, was really trying to find a language and trying out different ways of communicating a feeling or a sensation or a memory or some sort of visual characteristic, whether that's the stripes of clothing and what does that hint at, or what does that sort of describe, versus the like play of color of the skin of the figure. When the color becomes shifted in hue, what does that mean, or what can that mean? Or if there's this lack of unity or cohesiveness in the body or on the body, what does that mean? And that was a very important realization for me at that time. And I'm really grateful that grad school gave me the space and the tools and the people to explore and make those connections with my work and my process, and some of the the lineage of painting and the lineage of art making, where I could fit into that, and where I could find like-minded experience or different experience, and how did I want to work with that. So for me, grad school became a very informative chapter in that whole part of my process. So I was doing a bunch of these invented figures and really thinking about the shadow as a second being or a second presence or a second self. I really like that idea of presence being multiplied, and two versions of experience, or two versions of identity and understanding oneself, while at the same time not being overly descriptive of who this person is, So it also gave me this opportunity to start to, I don't know if it's a word, but universalize my feelings and my story and my understanding of life and the world and my family, and not make it be as specific, and as limited in who this person could be, So that was also a very big discovery for my practice at that time, was allowing what I thought about individually to be a space to create conversations universally, and that took me a while to really make sense of and figure out. And if you haven't noticed by now through these two live streams, a lot of my work bounces around quite a bit between modes of expression, modes of subject matter, modes of color and compositional methods and practices. And I've never really been the kind of artist to work in like chapters. Most of my work has been diverse and very multiplied, I guess, all at the same time. And I tend to work in like 3 or 4 different modes as I move throughout time, and then I kind of will let go of a certain mode and like shift a different mode, and it always feels like I'm kind of swimming in 2 or 3 different pools of thought or pools of process. And I've really debated whether that's the right way to make work and the right way to develop my voice as an artist, because, even now, recently, I think about this a lot. Like, so much of as artists, our time and our relationship to sharing our work is through these channels and systems like YouTube or our websites or social media, hopefully physical spaces like galleries or maybe museums. And, there are ways for us to get what we're doing and thinking about and expressing and experimenting and exploring out into the spaces of other people, right? To generate conversation or dialogue, or to raise awareness, or to make sense of something, or to find a place for what we do and how we feel and what we think. And I've contemplated over the years, like, is it better to just pick a certain vocabulary or a certain accent or language as an artist and just stick with that, And as much as I think I should be doing that, I think when I'm in my studio and I'm making and I'm working and I'm looking at what I'm making, that's not how I feel. I don't want to be limited to like, oh, this is the look and the style of my work, or this is the type of subject matter that people know me for, and I'm just going to stick to that. And if I go outside of that, I might lose some of my relationships, or I might lose opportunities, or I might, surprise my audience in a way that they don't want to be surprised, And I don't know if that's what people think in their studios and in their process, but that's something that has come up for me over the years at different times. And it's made me question, like, how if I want to make work that is diverse in languages, diverse in like formal qualities, in subject matter, am I always going to have space to share that work, and what's going to come of that stuff? So anyway, I just wanted to that sort of came back to mind as I'm starting to move through some of these different styles of painting and drawing and in grad school, and part of it I think was also coming into Michigan State's program. We were encouraged in the first of our 3 years as grad students to really explore and experiment and try things we didn't get to try prior to grad school, whether that's a certain medium or a certain scale or a certain language of making, and allow ourselves to have room to play and room to explore threads that we just maybe haven't even realized are very important to our work and the development of our work. So the first year of grad school, I took that to heart and I ran with that permission from the faculty and from other grad students, and tried not to worry about unity in my work or narrowing any ideas, or narrowing or distilling all of the experiments into now like this one final product, or whether that's a body of work or a certain product. So I was doing that quite a bit the first 2 years of grad school, if we're being honest. I don't know, I think looking back is when we can kind of make sense of what we were doing at the time and the road that we took, and maybe why we took that road, and how we can learn from those decisions and those experiments. So honestly, that's also why I'm doing these live streams, I think, is to go back and revisit some of those different moments in my thought process or in the way that I was working with paint. So these are some very small works on paper with gouache. I had just started working with gouache at this point in grad school. I was looking at painters and even technically like illustrators who worked with really vibrant palettes, and some studio painters too. And that started to inform the way that I was thinking about color and thinking about form and composition and, again, storytelling. One of those artists that I was looking at that first year of grad school was Nicole Eisenman, who's the artist behind this painting that's on the screen now. And she's a contemporary painter on the East Coast, I believe. And her paintings are super, super rich with personality and story and character and just aspects of the human experience or condition through her own personal experiences, and that, like, those are my favorite artists, is when I can look at their paintings and I can sense the significance that moment had on them as humans, let alone as an artist, and there's a sense of realism or truth to paintings like this, where I can feel that this is a moment that struck a chord or really struck a nerve with the artist and with her sense of understanding, and I think that level of vulnerability is sometimes hard to find in paintings and in artists through all of their work, and that's something that became a model for me through grad school, is this sense of authenticity, maybe is the best word to use here, where you feel like the painter is allowing the work to reveal itself to them, and not be too in control of what the painting is meant to say and what it's supposed to do and what it's supposed to, relate to in terms of its context, whether that's art history or a contemporary dialogue or more of a future-based context, and just making the painting because the painting needs to be made, and there's something about that directness about Nicole Eisenman's work that I really, really fell in love with as a grad student. And with that as well, some of the things that she would do, I guess I only have this one image of her work here, some of the things that she would do in her paintings where they were multi-figurative became even more influential to me in thinking about associations and thinking about an overarching kind of mood or atmosphere or feeling in the work, and how parts of the painting could generate different ideas, and how they related to one another and how they didn't relate to one another, through that sense of play. Like there is this sense of openness and freedom and playfulness in her work that was really, really inspiring for me at that time. So some of the paintings I was doing, I think this is in the summer. A lot of these little gouache paintings were made over the summer after my first year of grad school. And I was doing a lot of painting and drawing from photos. I was painting a lot from art history and starting to push color palettes and color systems in new directions than I had explored prior. I was also getting ready to go to a residency, my first ever art residency, at the Johnson. It's the Vermont Studio Center is the program, and it's based in Johnson, Vermont. And I applied during my first year of grad school. It was a way that I kind of wanted to, put myself in a new situation amongst a lot of other creators and a lot of other artists and writers, and see what could happen, and really try to expand my relationship to an art community in another way that was different from grad school. Like, because where I went to grad school, our program was relatively small. We had, in my year, there were 4 of us total, and in the year ahead of us, there were 5. The year ahead of them, there were 3 when I came into the program. So it was a relatively small community of grad students, and fortunately, we had some contact with undergrad students through teaching foundation courses that we were doing, but for the most part, I didn't feel like I was part of this bigger stream of conversation. And maybe, honestly, that's part of grad school, is just sort of closing the doors a little bit. But I figured, if I'm going to do a residency, I might as well do it in the first 2 years of the program. And I'm really glad that I did. I ended up having a wonderful month. It was August of 2018 that I was in Johnson, Vermont. And it's a beautiful time to be in Vermont because the water was refreshing and not too cold. And the studios were just full of obviously warmth, but like that like late summer kind of excitement, where it's not quite the fall, you're not quite back in that mode of school and working, and it just feels like kind of the last time to really try some new things before you're back in that structured space of an academic program. And shortly here we'll be on those paintings, so I don't want to get too deep into that experience, but you can see in some of these paintings where I'm pushing the playfulness of the subject and the figure, and starting to really pull in fragmented moments of the human body, and painters like Eisenman were really inspirational for some of those opportunities to invent things that felt very familiar. And that became a very important space for me as a grad student, was that kind of idea of the uncanny, and something being somewhat familiar to us but unfamiliar at the same time, and just the tension and power that can come out of those types of images were really exciting to explore. So this was a little gouache painting on paper, I think maybe like 4 inches by 6 inches, so it was a really small painting that I remember it was accepted into a show at a gallery I think in Brooklyn, or maybe it was a show in New Orleans. There was a surreal salon show that I had a few paintings in around this time. I can't remember if this was sold at that show or the show in Brooklyn, but I don't have this painting anymore. I kind of wish I did sometimes. I love the graphic quality that I was playing with here in the painting. And then also, some of these are a little bit later. This is 2019, so these are actually after that residency, but I'll just quickly say that, the summer of 2019, so before let me think, actually, it's hard to kind of remember these different moments, but so in 2017 in the fall, I started grad school, and then in 2018, after the spring semester, I did the residency in Vermont, came back into the program at Michigan State in the fall of 2018, and then that summer of 2019, so after my second year of grad school, I was part of a collaborative mural project, which I'll probably save that for another video. I have a portfolio on murals, but I was doing these gouache, very illustration-inspired paintings that were coming out of designs that we were bringing together for this mural in Lansing and East Lansing, where Michigan State's campus is. And I was looking at painters like Sainer and his collaborator, Mr. Aries, and their duo group called Etamcru, Etamcru. And these artists are insane when we think about color and composition, and really using the fundamentals of image making and painting to make very intentional spaces and emotional impacts in our work. And I fell in love with their paintings and the way that they use color and the way that they employ composition and value and line and shape and texture and pattern. And obviously you can see some of that influence coming into some of these sketches that I was experimenting with for murals, potential mural designs over here. And I was playing around with these very like cloud-like shapes and subjects at the time. And these are gouache paintings again on paper. Most of them are pretty small. I think this one and the one I just showed are also like 3x5 or 4x6 inches, somewhere in there. And just inventing, really thinking about shape and color. Now, again, this is 2019, and this was after I had taught a color and design course. So a lot of these ideas of composition and color relativity and properties of color were super, super fresh when I was playing with gouache at this time, and thinking more in terms of shape and overlapping of shape. and really starting to push where the body and the human form could go, to these more graphic states. I've always been a believer in this idea of like, you don't know if you're going to like it until you try it, and I approach a lot of my work with that mindset of like, I always want to be pushing something. I always want to be exploring something and pushing something further than what I've done before. And I can always go back, right? It's like I can always take a few steps back towards what I like and what I've done. And I think painting and art making is meant to be like that in a lot of ways. So as I'm going through this portfolio, I'm thinking to myself like, wow, there's a lot of variety here in composition and in medium or media, and in representation to abstraction to illustration. And part of me is like, wow, I really experimented a lot. But part of me is also like, wow, I'm really glad that I experimented a lot. And I gave myself this time and space to just try some different things and to be influenced by different artists and different paintings, and not to just go out and make paintings like somebody else, but to be like, that's an interesting filter, almost to portray something or to communicate something. Like, I wonder if I bring that little element into my process, what could happen? And these were some gouache paintings on paper with a little bit of colored pencil as a way to draw in the ideas initially. And a lot of these have, again, I think there's like the turkey boy painting where there's this weird shift of proportion and scale that almost becomes kind of funny at times. It becomes a little bit maybe grotesque or a little bit off-putting at times. And I like that quality of one image being able to be interpreted in multiple ways, right? Or maybe there's moments that are different from other moments. Like the color palette in the landscape has this like water swimmer, very bright, vivid, neutral to kind of positive feeling in a lot of ways in the background. But then the body and the head feel very kind of ominous and alarming and strange and unsettling, and I like that duality of feeling just in the color palette and some of those things. This was a little painting that I made based off of a photo that I took of Megan in Michigan when we were living in Michigan at the time. And then I kind of brought those languages of shape and composition into that subject, which was really fun to play around with. Again, just learn about color, and a lot of this is me learning new things about limited palettes and color relationships and value and compressing of values and ways to create form and to connect, different elements in a painting, through shape or through texture or through color, and using more of an abstract language to push and pull things together or push things around in a painting. And they're small, so it was really easy to just try out different ideas really quickly. And some of these, like, I still just love this foot, just the color contrast and the almost complementary salmon to seafoam green, simultaneous contrast happening here is just so satisfying to me, and that's what I look at when I see Sainer's paintings, right? Those color relationships and moments, like in the green and purple kind of lower right corner there, it's satisfying. There's something about those colors touching each other that is so unique and dynamic and electrifying, that I could only learn that by doing it in some of these gouache sketches on paper, and then in other ones I'm kind of trying to push less of that graphic quality. I'm trying to see what else gouache can do, and just exploring the medium and thinking more transparently, more painterly, trying to approach it more like I would in oil painting. And even though gouache will dry on the paper, it will also reactivate and re-wet if you bring a wet brush into the painting again. So I was starting to explore, what can gouache do? What can it look like? How can it change? Here's another one of Sainer's paintings here. Just for reference of things I was looking at the time. And, sometimes I was coming up with some really strange, weird characters and, these almost otherworldly creatures at the time. And I think in 2019, I also had started looking at books from the library on Northern Renaissance painters, people like Hieronymus Bosch or Peter Bruegel the Elder, where, there was this really beautiful inventiveness to their Northern Renaissance paintings. And there's this kind of crystal clear sense of representation where they're not trying to obscure information or hide information. They're really revealing, like, hey, these are some pretty crazy, dark, scary concepts, but that's part of the reason why we're making this painting, And I was starting to give myself some more permission to paint more directly what it is I'm trying to express, and not hide information that maybe is frightening or unsettling. But then balancing that or contrasting that with languages, abstract languages that are just kind of neutral or poppy or kind of cartoony in a way, that they feel a little bit more innocent or naive. And I like that combination of image, image quality. And again, a lot of these paintings are very small works on paper, so they're very intimate little paintings, and they give this sense of simplicity and playfulness when you see them in person, because they are so small and kind of delicate. The surface quality is very matte. If you've never worked with gouache, it's an opaque watercolor medium, so it's diluted with water. Its consistency is very similar to watercolor, but there's a different ingredient in the paint that allows it to be opaque. So unlike watercolor, with gouache, you can use light colors over dark colors. So it's a bit more forgiving, and there's this matte surface quality that it has if you're getting traditional gouache. They also make acrylic gouache, which is like acrylic and gouache kind of hybrid. Because that has a polymer ingredient, a plastic ingredient, the surface of those paintings are not matte. They have a bit of a sheen to them, like an acrylic painting. But I've only ever used the traditional gouache, so all of these have a very matte, kind of chalky surface to them, which sometimes I really like, other times I don't really like. And one of the things I do love about gouache, though, is the drying speed of the medium, especially if you're working on paper, I've only ever used gouache on paper, to my recollection. And it dries so quickly that it's kind of like you're drawing with a paintbrush, So a lot of these marks on this like doughy belly subject here, I would lay down that mark and it would dry within a few seconds, and I could just keep layering and layering and layering, kind of like a drawing with colored pencils. And there's just certain qualities about different paint mediums that give us a feeling that really fits the image, and sometimes that would work out with gouache paintings, sometimes it would not work out. Like in this one, there are moments I really love, like right up in this weird head cloud form section. I love the way that this noisy background sky shape turned out. It feels like stars, and it feels like, just the night sky and galaxies and atmosphere, and it just feels so organic and so far away. And a lot of that was accidental. Like I don't remember how I even achieved that effect. I think that was just by accident, but I wish I could do it every time, because it has such a beautiful, like, organic distillation of mark and of value there that is really satisfying to look at again. But anyway, gouache was this medium that was very easy to travel with too, so I was working with it a lot at this time. And I think most of these were made in the summer of 2019 going into the fall of 2019. Yeah, they're all pretty small. I've never tried to do a large gouache painting. I think the largest I've ever done is maybe like a 16 by 20 or maybe like a 12 by 16, somewhere in there. I've never tried anything that's like 2 by 2 feet or larger. It would be pretty fun to see what can happen though if you have more space, because then it just takes longer, right? A lot of these paintings I could finish within one session, maybe a 3-hour session or a 2-hour session, or some of the really abbreviated kind of cloud shaped ones. I did a lot of those, I think, in under an hour. So some of the portraits would take multiple hours. Like I think on some of these I probably spent close to 4 hours making them, even though they're like this big, And that was something I really liked about working with these at the time too, is that it gave me this world to build and to create that was handheld. And I really loved that dynamic of like building this really expansive universe and this expansive moment from nothing. A lot of this is just out of imagination and almost autonomous, where you're just starting to draw a line and all of a sudden it looks like part of a head or part of a leg or part of a structure. And then from there I could just build out the image. And it was very intuitive, but it was all handheld, so it has this very intimate kind of presence that I really, really enjoyed at the time that I was making it. But anyway, these are all very different paintings. Like that was the thing I kind of was starting to realize was like, they're not really that related in my eyes. And I would try things and come back to them and then, leave things for a while. But I never really created like a series or a kind of, unified body of work out of these, even though they're related because they're all the same media and they're all this kind of small, intimate scale and size. But yeah, it was just really a lot of fun to work with. I think part of the reason there's a little hair in this scan. Part of the reason why gouache was such a appealing medium to me at this time too, like I was saying, I was teaching a color and design course, and so many of the concepts in that class were taught through a non-objective exercise and really not worrying about representation and symbolism and metaphor and meaning and that kind of stuff. I mean, metaphor could still come into non-objective work, of course, but it wasn't like we were creating images, that were very recognizable most of the time, especially talking about color. I don't know. The more I say that, the more I'm like, well, we did some like movie scene paintings where students would have to go and pick out multiple stills from a movie and then compose them through layering. And then we would use that as a way to practice transparency or implied transparency through opaque material, right? So that was the thing, is like when you bring two objects together and you overlap them to make it feel like one of those objects is translucent, that would mean that the color of that object is going to change as it layers over the second object, right? So if this is green and this is, let's say, red, where they overlap, that section of this front object would theoretically change its color property, maybe its value. And with those two particular colors, there would be that complementary relationship happening where they would start to mute one another. And you would end up with more of an achromatic middle mixture. So I was saying, I'm getting off track a little bit, but I was saying that we didn't work with representation, but that's actually not true. We did work with some representation. But through those assignments that I would lead with my class, I wanted to apply a lot of those ideas to my own work, and that's what I've really benefited from as a teacher in grad school, was that I was relearning so many of these super important fundamental ideas through assignments and lectures and like artist examples that I would show. And then I would finish my class, go back to my studio, and that would still sit with me in my studio, and then that would inform the way I would come up with my own paintings and the way that I would develop ideas or think about color palettes. And it just really gave me a better informed stance on the work I wanted to make, and the way that I was understanding other artists' work, like in this example on the lower left part of the screen with Sainer, this like muralist, illustrator, studio artist. So, I kind of felt like I was becoming more comfortable playing with color and really being intentional about color, where prior to teaching color and design, I think color I've heard people say like color scares me, color freaks me out. And I don't know if I would go that far as to say that it was scary, but it just wasn't a focus in the way that I was painting for a really long time. Or at the very least, I would just pick a singular family of colors, or a certain hue, and then that would be as far as I would think about color, or maybe then there was one moment where I would put in a contrasting like alien color, and that relationship became as much as I thought about color. Otherwise, it was about value or paint quality or edge quality or composition or drawing. After teaching color and design and talking about Johannes Itten or talking about Joseph Albers and talking about relativity of color, that's when things really started to become exciting, I think, for my work in my studio. And the book called Color and Light by James Gurney, if you're familiar with James Gurney, he's got a really great YouTube channel, and he's just an all-around incredible asset to the painting community and the art community. And I bought his book when I was in Arizona living with Megan's parents in 2017. And that was one of the first times a book on art, like methods and concepts and fundamentals, actually stuck with me. And it was one of the first times where reading about painting was exciting. His book in particular never felt like a textbook. It never felt dry. I remember getting a copy of it, and it's a very affordable book. I think it's under $20 most of the time. I remember getting the book and kind of having very low expectations about it. Like I was like, I've never liked art books. They always feel too dry and scientific. And I started reading his book, and I finished the book within like 2 days. And that's not saying a lot because there's a lot of visual imagery in the book and not a whole lot of text, but the ideas that he was sharing and the way that he was connecting those ideas to examples that he made and reproduced in his book, it just made perfect sense to me. And that was the first kind of primer, actually, back in 2017 with color for me. But when I taught color and design in 2000, I think it was 2019, in the spring of 2019, that's when things really started to click for me with being more intentional about color palettes and composition, and really trying to really think about like what do I want this part of a painting to do and say, like here with this Velázquez kind of copy, very playful copy on a Velázquez portrait. I wanted to really think about like the heat of the lava lamp in this part of the painting. And I was like, well, how am I going to make it feel extra warm in temperature, And I was trying to incorporate some of those concepts that I learned in teaching color and design, whether it was through the relativity of temperature or chroma or value, this idea of transparency and how the light is going to change the color of something else in a painting, reflected light or environmental light, and how that shifts the surface of a form or an object. So like on the right side of the portrait, there's more of the yellow present on those highlights. So those ideas really started to give the work, in my opinion, more validity and a little bit more believability or relatability maybe, and just became more exciting to make those paintings then at that time. But this was a painting, I think this was in a small work show. I forget where this painting was sent, but I believe it was purchased at a show, which is really cool. But again, sometimes there's paintings where I'm like, I wish I had that painting still. It was a really fun painting, and I love the way that the gouache marks stayed so crisp and visible. But anyway, I think that also was when I was framing gouache paintings under plexiglass. So I think at this time I wasn't super into gouache as in terms of exhibiting the paintings. It was fun to make the paintings and to share them, just unframed with people, but it's hard to really get a sense of the feeling of the surface under plexiglass. So that was something that definitely informed the way that I was working with the medium a little bit at the time. and partially why I was working so small, I think, because it was more affordable for me to frame and make frames for smaller paintings. And this was a painting that was playing a lot with collage, obviously, and very different types of reference imagery and motifs. A lot of the images here are from Google searches on the city of Matamoros, Mexico. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. Unfortunately, I do not speak Spanish, so it's its own thing. But that's where my father's family lives and where he grew up. And I've been there once when I was very young. I was in middle school, I think, at the time. And part of what I've talked about in some of my studio work is this internal conversation of identity and family and history and people. And growing up in Wisconsin with very few peers that had similar ethnic backgrounds as myself or even my siblings, it made us feel more different, and there's something very contemporary or very modern about that feeling as our country becomes more and more multicultural, which is amazing. I think it's an amazing superpower that we have with our country, and if that is embraced, I think it'll just bring people closer together, And grad school. So the years I was in grad school were 2017 up until 2020, right? So if you're thinking about the political space at that time, a lot of those years were Trump's presidency and dealing with him and his sort of, platform of pushing xenophobia and pushing racism and pushing the othering of people definitely kind of fed into interactions that I had in my personal life. Nothing major or thankfully nothing too memorable or crazy, but it felt like there was this shift in the way that jokes were told or the way that people approached what was acceptable to say to someone that you didn't really know at all. And for me, that always sparked this like very deep history of perception and of making sense of how people associated things about my personality or my cultural background. And part of this painting of looking at the city of Matamoros in Mexico, this border city, at a time when like the border was this really hot topic, and this idea of security, or this idea of God, it's hard to put some of this stuff into words a little bit. Familiarity, I guess, would be another word that comes to mind when I think about this painting. This is a 6x6 inch little gouache painting on paper, by the way. And there's this very unfamiliar relationship that I have to this city in many ways. Most of my relationship to that city is very unfamiliar, but there's this other part of me that feels like it's supposed to be familiar, right? Because there's this one person whose lineage I am connected to, who grew up there, and like his family's from there, and his siblings and their kids and cousins, and so on, generations of people, like that's the field at which their life revolves around, right? And being so far removed from that up in a rural pocket of Wisconsin with my mother's family just created this weird sense of distance and this weird sense of fracturing or fragmenting of space and time and longing and mystery and ambiguity and just having so many questions, about that story and that history. And even this process of searching things, like at the foreground, there's this little keyboard with these like spidery fingers that are typing away. And anyway, so this painting was kind of just that open-ended process of going and looking for visual information without having a plan, and organically did I come to this kind of composition. which is something that I don't do very often anymore. I would like to try some of these methods of image making again in the near future. Just the combining of disparate parts into a composition. And there's the mascot kind of symbol again. And some of these, were just kind of about characterization or even caricatures of people, and like maybe they're myself, maybe they're my friends, maybe they're my family members, maybe they're my neighbors, maybe they're teachers I had, or maybe they're combinations of multiple people. And the goal when making some of these paintings was to reach a point where I could look at it and go, yeah, that feels familiar, or like that reminds me of this person, or that reminds me of this moment that I had. And it's not a literal depiction of the moment or the person. It's just this combination of all the pieces that when you bring those pieces into one space or one image or one view, it creates this story, or it creates this feeling. And there's something really, really exciting and fulfilling about that process, right? Where it's just like, hey, I'm just going to sit down with a pencil and a piece of paper and I'm going to just start drawing. And if I can hit this point where I start to see something that I know in the image, then I know I've got something really that's going to last. It's going to hit me for a while. And paintings like this, these little gouache paintings, definitely were in that vein, and I was playing a lot with smoke, I remember too, at this time, and fire, and just there's something about fire that is very just kind of maybe polarizing to some extent. Like it's this tool that we've harnessed for energy. It's this thing that we use for fuel and for food. It's something that we use to destroy things. Sometimes it's out of our control. Sometimes it's in our control. So I like that fire can be this symbol of extremes, these like polar opposite feelings and ideas. And that was something I started to really bring into my work a lot around this time as a symbol. It's like this recurring motif that I really liked. And just humor. I was also just really trying to play with humor and looking at artists like Nicole Eisenman, or who else was I looking at a lot at the time? Some of the Northern Renaissance painters like Peter Bruegel, Hieronymus Bosch. Here's a Bruegel painting where they're telling these like stories that are more like moralist kind of stories. I think that's sort of the term, is like, hey, there's a really big lesson that we're supposed to get out of this painting, or it's telling this myth or this story that we can look at it and we learn something, or we're reminded of some sort of bigger truth, and I liked that humor could have such a big role in that kind of painting, where you can look at it initially and go, wow, that's really weird, or that's really funny, or wow, that's kind of creepy, and then be like, but it's also kind of funny at the same time. Like I like that some of these paintings had like a 1-2 punch, or like a peeling of layers, where it's not just one single idea or one single feeling that comes across. It's this layering of multiple things, and I grew up in Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts. My brother and I, with the help and motivation from our mother, made it all the way through, the ranks of Boy Scouts all the way up to Eagle, and we both got our Eagle Scout badge and honor, and that was such a rich space for feelings and paintings and ideas about, masculinity and manhood and toxic masculinity, and what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a leader? What does it mean to be, part of a group of other men, in today's world? And when I grew up in a troop of Boy Scouts, there were a lot of these moments where some of those bigger questions would come up, and I was learning a lot in those environments. Whether I liked it or not, I was seeing a lot of examples of boys with other boys, or boys with their fathers, or boys with other fathers, in like the context of learning how to become a man, or what other people's philosophies on that question were. and being tough, being strong, being resourceful, being smart, being a good communicator or a good listener. There's something about that structured scouting experience that, as an artist now, I can like dig through my memory and just revisit a moment where it's like, wow, that's a perfect example of competition or of vulnerability, and how do I present that in a painting, or why would I present that in a painting? So for me, it's kind of nice to be able to go back and revisit some of those formative chapters. And on top of that, like, it's a symbol of my relationship to my brother, my older brother, Tony, who we went through school together. We shared a room. We were in Boy Scouts together. So every camping trip, we would share the same tent, and I think for me, like, those years and those memories and experiences are very positive because of the fact that my brother was there with me. And it was a space for us to develop a very close bond that I think is going to last until both of us die, And as I got older, I realized, like, a lot of siblings don't have that level of closeness or that level of trust or that level of being familiar with your siblings, and being able to share moments of adolescence together and share the moments that were really fun and exciting, or share the moments that were really scary and unsettling at the same time. So this was a kind of a little painting, a little bit about some of those ideas maybe, and I was also just thinking about guns. I almost couldn't even say that word, guns, and thinking about the male's relationship to a gun and the power and the symbolism of that, and being someone with brown skin or somewhat brown skin, and compared to my surrounding community, I think I mentioned this in the last live stream that, I forget what painting we were looking at, but growing up after 9/11, like in middle school to high school, like there were times where people would make jokes that, like, oh, you kind of look like a terrorist, or you kind of look like, so and so, and it was like these lighthearted jokes that would always rub me the wrong way, and I would be like, why would you even, why would you say that, or why is that funny, and why am I the example for that, and as I get older, it's like, obviously media representation, storytelling has so much power in the way that we develop associations to people, and again, going through grad school during Trump's era was a difficult time in some ways, because I could relate to what was happening in the national discussions about security and foreign policy and migration and some of these sort of like othering conversations, and painting was a place for me to sort of play out some of those ideas and those conversations, not to necessarily be like, this is what I think everyone should think, more of just like, this is how it's affecting me, and this is how I would share or describe that feeling and the way that looks, and sometimes it's really funny and kind of weird, sometimes it's really direct and really kind of dark, but usually most of the time it's kind of complex, it's like it's got multiple layers kind of running through it. But this is another little gouache painting, 4x6 inches here. This one also 4x6. This painting is in a private collection. This was called Taco Boy, and again, you can see fire is like this looming apocalyptic kind of symbol, and I really loved the way that the color properties turned out in the glasses and in the face, and just the characterization of the head, and the little Taco Bell wrapper. Like, I really at this time loved the quality of the image that I was exploring, and the expressiveness of form, and just these little stains and little Taco Bell bag. And again, I think for me, a lot of grad school was pushing the possibilities, like really reaching out as far as I could, and then pulling back what I liked to the core things I wanted to really talk about. So sometimes it was like, oh, gouache is this new tool. It's this new medium where I can, play around with color, and I can play around with composition, and it dries really fast, and it's kind of like drawing, and how can I use that when I'm painting with oils, So this is a painting that I made in the fall of 2018. I think, I'm trying to remember now if this was before or after I went to the residency. But it definitely varied. So somebody has a question. The boy with blonde hair was painted by who? Let me go back real quick. If it was one of these, I don't know if it was one of these paintings. I'm assuming maybe this is the painting that David is asking about. This is a Velázquez painting. I'm just going to go back a few more to see if there's another blonde hair. But all of these paintings on the right side of the screen here are my paintings from my portfolio on my website. A couple of them are sort of like inspired by or reproductions of art historical paintings. Like that one was Velázquez. I'm going to check to see if any of the paintings in the unless it's this painting maybe that David's talking about. If this was the painting, it's Sainer, Sainer. That's his artist name, and he's also part of a duo, or he was at one point, called Etam Crew, Etam space CRU, with another artist who goes by the name Mr. Aries, and both of them have kind of a similar image making approach. I think they were trained as illustrators, but hopefully that answers your question if it was one of those two paintings. But anyway, this painting on the right here from my portfolio was done before or after the residency in Vermont. And, you can see that influence of humor and that playfulness of form, combining kind of a collage aesthetic with things overlapping in space in different ways. And, the motif of the fire pit, and just some of these different personal symbols were things I really wanted to bring into my vocabulary of painting. It's almost like your alphabet as an artist. It's like, okay, these are my spices when I'm making a dish. When I'm painting, it's like these are the images and the motifs and the symbols that hold a lot of personal association for me. Like I grew up skateboarding, and I spent a lot of time on our driveway, our blacktop driveway, skateboarding on these little ramps, or like this box that my uncle helped me build, basketballs that we would play with, and just sort of this playground of forms and elements to kind of exist with the figure and around the figure. And again, earlier I talked about Alberto Giacometti, right? This painter and sculptor who worked with a very elongated human form and a very expressive type of form. And that was something that kind of stuck with a lot of my studio work for a long time, was that willingness to push the body of the human into these new spaces and categories, right? Where it's like, oh, what happens if the central part of the figure is really, really elongated and almost hunched over? Like, how does that change the feeling of the figure? How do I understand how that figure feels, So those were some of the ideas that were coming into this painting in particular. One of the things I really liked about the making of this painting, which is called Heavy Shit, and it's a 30-inch by 40-inch painting. I still have this painting. And one of the things I loved about the process and the result of the process was the variety in application or paint quality. Some areas are very opaque and kind of impasto, like this yellow foot arm form. And then other areas are very smooth and flat and kind of have more of the like Italian Renaissance glazing language to them, where the volume is trying to be more elusive, and that sense of touch and light is a lot more delicate in some areas. And I liked that contrast of areas in the painting that were really like present and would really punch in a very direct way, versus areas that were more smooth and gradual, or like in the pants, the jeans, and the painting. And then there were just ideas that I was starting to explore with, showing a presence that maybe was dangerous or kind of an antagonist character in the painting, whether it was this kind of like dark kind of pit hole in the back of the painting over here, or the snake in the foreground. So I liked that it could be really open-ended for the interpretation, and then scale was something that also I was like, hey, there's a lot you can do with scale, where, if the skateboard is really, really small, either it's really far away or the figure is really, really big. And I kind of liked that scale could open up those opportunities to have the painting say some new things or different things. And then I also liked the expression. I don't love the way that I painted the expression, because initially it was a very rough, almost like Bay figurative kind of painting, right? Where it was like really gestural and visceral paint, and Francis Bacon kind of, I think, was really exciting at the time. And when I started the painting, I wanted it to be like really visceral and very thick and impasto. And then partway through the rest of the painting, I was like, actually, I kind of like this smoother, delicate touch. Maybe I should slow down in some areas and be a little bit more particular about the surface quality that I'm trying to achieve. So I painted over it, but you can still see some of those textures in the cheek and the forehead, and that's why I'm not super thrilled on the results. But sometimes you got to just try stuff and then figure out what's working later on. All right, so now we've made it finally to paintings that I made at my residency in the Vermont Studio Center in Johnson. It's kind of the only residency I've really done where you go somewhere and you live there and you're amongst other creatives, whether they're artists or writers. And for that month that I was there, it was really, really just like a creative paradise, like the conversations I got to have with other artists and writers, and they brought in some visiting lecturers that were really, amazing, successful, and humble artists, and to just meet them in person and watch their lecture, and then they would visit your studio. Like, it just felt so unreal, and I felt very fortunate to be there. So that month that I was there was this like incubator of permission, where I felt like I could really push my work in ways that I wanted to, and that felt right to me, and I should explain really quickly here that my trip to Vermont from Michigan at that time was a road trip with my car. Megan was with me all the way to Philadelphia, and then she flew home to Michigan from Philadelphia. And then from Philadelphia, I drove up to Vermont for the residency. But on that road trip, we stopped in a few cities, and I remember in Philadelphia, after she flew home, I spent the rest of that afternoon at the Museum of Art in Philadelphia, which, if you've never been to that museum, it is definitely very high on my list of museums that you should see in the U.S. I don't have a very extensive list, so maybe I'm not the best person to ask, but it's worth going if you're in that area. And so the residency was so well timed, right? Because I had just gone to a museum. I was also, I had the opportunity to meet up with an artist who taught and maybe still teaches at the Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia at PAFA. Martin Campos is his name, and he was somebody that I had just sort of casually talked with on Instagram for that year prior, maybe 2 years prior. And just every few months, I would respond to his story, or I would comment on a post. And it got to a point where he would call me by my name, and we kind of were somewhat, acquaintances online. And when I knew I was going to be going to Philly, I was like, hey, maybe I can meet Martin, if he's around that day that I'll be in town. So while Megan and I were there, we did get to meet up with Martin, and he showed us around PAFA's museum and a little bit of their studios, which was really cool. It's just fun to meet people that you admire and you respect so much. So going into the residency after the museum trips and meeting Martin and just, this really fun journey to get there, the whole experience just was incredible. So it was a really fun time. Before I move on, the last image here that I'm showing is a Peter Bruegel painting. So he was one of the other influences that I had during these 3 years of grad school as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off that little part of the screen. And I'll just talk about some of these paintings that are here in the portfolio. So one of the things that I remember bringing with me to my residency, because thankfully, because I was driving there, I could just load everything in my car. And, I decided to work on paper because I didn't want to have to worry about the fragility of stretched canvases. I also liked the flatness of paper as well, and that gave me a chance to try out some collage techniques, like some physical collage techniques with tape and with smaller paintings on paper or Xerox copies of photographs or postcards. I was collecting postcards at that time too that were either about places in Wisconsin or places in Mexico or places in Texas or in areas where my father was incarcerated, and there was this interesting sense of history and sense of story that I could access through these postcards that I was finding. And honestly, I was just buying them online right off of eBay, and that was kind of a fun step in the process that I was continuing to explore during the residency in Vermont. So you can see some residue of those Xerox copies of postcards. I'm going to take a quick second here to let my dog inside and transfer him over to a different room. Come on in, Mike. Sorry about that. But anyway, this was this is kind of a diptych that became a single painting through a lot of layers of paint and collaged materials. I'm not going to go through every part of this painting because that would take a really long time. But it was a really exciting period where I felt like I was figuring out a way to combine all of these different modes of painting that I was interested in up until that point, while also testing out some new ways to incorporate physical media and artifacts of my own personal archive, my family's archive, things that I was pulling from more of a public archive with the postcards, and allowing the process to be really experimental. I still really enjoy these paintings that I brought home from the residency, and these are another couple of works that never really were exhibited anywhere, and I kind of regret that. But who knows, maybe at some point in the future I'll find a way to show them somewhere. So there are a couple that were like 2 sheets of paper brought together somehow. I think they were either just tacked on the wall together, or they were physically taped together. Like this one has actual pieces of tape in the middle of the painting. And this painting was based off of a still life that I set up in my studio at the residency, and I brought some small toys and props and kind of personal artifacts with me on the trip. So I was setting those up, and then also acquiring things from the landscape around the studio buildings in Johnson and bringing them inside and painting those, and really building up a history of time and reference in some of these paintings. And they were really a lot of fun to make, because it was one of the first times I kind of felt like, I'm combining all of these things into one process, or into one product, for lack of a better word, and I liked that it allowed a single painting to have multiple moments of story or of meaning or of raising questions and those kinds of things. So yeah, this was a really fun painting to make too. And then just for a bit of reference on the scale, I think each of these sheets of paper are 20 inches by 30 inches. So that would make this painting 30 inches by 40-ish, maybe a little less because the overlap of the paper. But they're oil paintings with mixed media collaged materials, and they're on primed paper. So these are on acrylic gessoed paper. And none of them were ever mounted on panels or anything like that, which honestly, that might be the thing that made them feel more like unfinished works, and why I never showed them is because they were just sort of floating on paper. And I wonder if I mount them, if it'll change my feeling of those paintings. Now, some of these were not made at the residencies. This is where the portfolio might start to kind of fizzle out or bounce around a little bit. But this was an 8x10 painting that I made, I think, over that summer in 2019 as well, if I'm remembering correctly. I think that's right. So this is like probably June of 2019. And this painting actually was purchased by one of my professors in grad school, which was really, really cool. I was looking at some of those artists that I talked about earlier, like Sainer. There's another guy, Ruprecht von Kaufmann, that I really love a lot. So I was kind of borrowing some of the things that he does in his paintings with shape and different languages of image, whether it's more cartoony and more graphic with more rendered areas, things that are a bit more surreal. And I liked this idea of combining multiple modes of painting or multiple modes of information into a single space. And that was a pretty key part of my progression in grad school too, was allowing paintings to have diverse forms of information or material or meaning, and that being kind of central to the idea of the work, right? Is that it's not a singular, form of information. It's about that diverse multiplicity of information to create something new, and whether that's with pattern or shape or paint that's more physical and impasto. I related to that a lot more than I did with some of the more singular kinds of paintings that I was making up until that point. So they're also kind of playful. This is also during that mural making time period too, and really pushing the variety in moments, whether it's from invention or abstraction or referencing something. I liked the open-endedness of some of these paintings. This is kind of another process that I would like to kind of return to here at some point, is this like organic transitioning of space, where you go from one moment and it kind of, the paint is sort of blurring that edge into something else. And I like that history of transformation that's more visible in some of these paintings, which were a lot of fun to make. I want to say this is 2019, I think, is when I had made these paintings that summer. And some of them were based off of sketches that I had in my sketchbook, that then I could transform with wider color palettes and more varying types of description, like with the dog silhouette. That was from a drawing in a sketchbook that I had come up with. I think this hand and arm that connected to the dog, I think all of this was originally from a sketch in one of my Moleskine sketchbooks. And then this central area here is a still life with physical, like cardboard, mat board pieces that I had built just like as a little tabletop, almost like stage set. And I had seen examples of maquettes for stages, like set design teams and groups that were really inspiring, and kind of allowed me to play in more of a three-dimensional space to then make two-dimensional work from. That removes me from a reference, or a photograph or a two-dimensional reference, or even from just observing something in its natural state. It allowed me to kind of disrupt a three-dimensional space as my starting place. And that was a lot of fun to work that way. And that's kind of something I'm doing now with some of my plein air work with objects that I'm sculpting and building for props out in nature or in the public space. And it's cool to be able to go back and pick out these moments where I'm like, actually, this is where some of those ideas kind of started with my painting practice. This is one of the few kind of nude paintings that are in this portfolio, so I apologize for that. But you can see the last few paintings all have a similar variety in language, a variety in shape, variety in mark making, variety in surface quality, in color palette, in pattern, edge quality. It's kind of a graphic style of painting, which again, that also came out of teaching that color and design class, where we were really focused on shape and composition and color relationships. I think, this is the last painting now in this portfolio, which is good because we're over the 2-hour mark for this live stream. So this is a good painting to kind of close out on. This painting is titled Sweet Beets and the Sugar Chief. And the name comes from research that I was doing on campus with the library system, with the Lansing City Archive system, and trying to learn more about place in Lansing and the history that is relevant to the city of Lansing and to the state of Michigan. And one of the things that I came across organically online in 2019, in the fall of 2000, the summer and the fall of 2019 is when I had finished this painting. And it's actually on top of an older painting that I didn't like. And it's a pretty good sized painting. I think it's probably maybe like 52 or 54 inches tall by about 40 inches wide, maybe 44 inches wide, something like that. It's a pretty large sized painting, relevant to what I've shown in the live stream so far. And so it was over this older painting, and now you can't see any of that initial painting in this final image at all. So all of it was covered. But what I liked about the making of this painting is that it also had this very organic layering of subject matter and multiplicity of moment through a process of what's the word? Not seeking out, maybe like consuming of information online. So what I was doing at the time was searching different ideas and terms relevant to the research that I started to talk about with the history in Michigan. And I came across this article that was written by, I think, a PhD student, somehow tied to Michigan State University. And the article was all about the Braceros Project, which, again, I apologize if I'm pronouncing that very poorly, but it was kind of like a farming assistance program that brought migrants from below the border near Mexico or in Mexico to the U.S. to help with some of the agricultural demands and needs in the U.S. And one of the places where migrants were being bussed up to was Michigan and areas around Lansing, Michigan. And this article just sort of talked about that history, and it talked about how the migrants were treated at the time. It talked about what happened to some of those families and people once the Great Depression had hit, because a lot of these stories were in his article were dealing with the like 1920s to like the 1940s, and moments when like the economy started to suffer. That's when a lot of these migrants would be repatriated or expatriated or whatever that term is, back to south of the border. And a lot of the families were kind of treated as scapegoats for the economy and the state of the economy. And that article kind of opened my eyes to a parallel of history and how history kind of repeats itself. And, I was seeing a lot of current news coverage and media about the migrant state in the U.S. and farming culture and the farming industry, and how a lot of those field laborer positions were cycled through different groups of demographic migrants to the U.S. So the article kind of talks about how at a certain point the jobs started to shift from the field to factories, and that kind of created this really big demand in field laborers, and how a lot of the workers that ended up in the factories didn't want to do these really difficult, very weather, I don't know what the right word is, but just rough jobs out in the natural elements, and physically demanding jobs. And so the groups that were willing to do those jobs were being bussed up from other places in the world, and other countries and nationalities. But what I thought was interesting was how this group of people who helped sustain an industry were treated at different times, and it felt very similar to things I was seeing in media in 2018, 2019, with migrants, and just with the larger political group at the time, in Trump's presidency and his cabinet, and just some of the policies that were coming out at the time, and the way that things were talked about just felt very inflated with patriotism, and kind of very xenophobic ideas seemed to be packaged in patriotic lingo and language. And I thought that was a very weird thing to notice and start to try to make sense of. So this painting kind of became about that feeling and about that relationship to larger industries and people who are willing to do the work that nobody wants to do, and how their cultures maybe are exploited at times for different reasons. So one of the things that I was doing for compiling and consuming imagery for the painting was looking up tattoos, and all of these tattoos that are painted on this long kind of rubbery arm are based on photos that are online of people's actual tattoos. And some of them say things like, this one says, "I don't want to talk taco about it." That's this one here. This has little footprints that made in USA. This one has a little UFO with an alien getting pulled up through the UFO. There's alien tattoos. There's one that looks almost like a sombrero, this little spaceship. There's the US shape or outline of the country. Tacos. There's one that says "Party in the USA," and there's a taco in the middle, which I thought was very ironic, And then there's this little dinosaur with a sombrero that says "Make me a taco" on it. And I found all these different tattoos, and they just felt a little, I don't know, they seem to be using culture and cultural symbolism in ways that felt insincere, kind of, to me anyway. And I just wanted to bring those in the painting, and sort of juxtaposed against very Americana kind of imagery of the flag and of this sort of apple pie, and moments where you feel like neighborhood watch is this sort of way to keep certain people in certain communities, or this idea of travel and this idea of tourism and the consuming of culture, or the overconsumption of culture, in ways that just almost feel disrespectful at times, or ICE. A lot of stuff that was happening with ICE and deportations were really big in the news at that time too. And I just, sort of playing around with different symbolisms and trying to find a way to bring all of these different pieces into one painting that felt complicated, and it felt difficult to maneuver and to navigate and to make sense of. And, so there's moments to me that feel kind of absurd and almost comical at times, but maybe there's this darker undertone in the work. A lot of these references are things that I found online that really do exist in some form or fashion. So like on this figure, this gentleman that's kind of got this like daiquiri head that's grilling, like this piece of AstroTurf and the grill were painted from a photo reference that I actually took of our AstroTurf and grill, little mini grill that we had in Lansing at the time. And so I'm also combining things from my personal experience into the painting. Like this is part of a self-portrait here. We have, images from figures that I took in parks that were releasing these like different balloons. And, so it was a fun way to combine found imagery with personal imagery, and then also to throw in things that were just kind of invented, more free form. But one of the last things I'll talk about, two things. So one is these forms here are sugar beets, and that article that I brought up, in a very rough kind of haphazard way. That article that I read was really geared towards the sugar beet industry, and that was a particular crop that was tied to that history of the migrant labor force that came in to help farm that crop, which created this solution to the cane sugar monopoly that was happening in the U.S. at the time, because sugar in the early 20th century was really, really expensive for like the everyday person. And in Michigan, one of the key alumni, and I think he might have been a professor, I can't remember his name now, he was responsible for introducing sugar beets to the U.S. as this alternative crop for sweetener at the time, and as a way to kind of fight against the monopoly of the sugar industry that was more based in the south of the country with cane sugar harvesting that was happening. So that's why the sugar beets are in the painting. That's why it's in the title, as kind of this like preface to this whole world and this whole space where, kind of like the Bruegel paintings, you're dealing with these multi-narrative spaces, and you're trying to make sense of the moment and of the history and of the people and how you relate to those things. So this was a very satisfying painting for me in a lot of ways, because of these different sort of moments that are coming and going in the painting, and that feel very intense and feel very subtle. And there's a lot of range and diversity in the way that the painting exists in my eyes. So it's one of my favorite paintings that I've made, especially from this time period in my studio practice. One of the last things I'll talk about here are the boots and the briefs that this figure is wearing in the painting, both of which are objects that you can actually purchase in real life. And I remember through some sort of searching on American flag printed merchandise, I ended up finding these Abraham Lincoln boxer briefs, and it just shocked me that these are things that are made that you can actually buy and consume and wear. And the idea of putting a president's face over your crotch just it's never something I would have guessed would have been a product that was purchasable. And I don't remember where those were made. Like, I don't know if those are made in the US or if they're made somewhere else or who makes them anymore. But that was something I remember through my kind of like accumulation of research and of reference material that just added to like the absurdity of the whole feeling of this painting to me. And, this idea of pride and patriotism is something that I kind of see coming and going in really weird contexts. Like, it feels hypocritical sometimes when I'll hear people talk about protecting our country and like really taking pride in the flag. And like, you think about Colin Kaepernick and you think about these people that, are categorized as disrespecting symbols of the country. and the status quo of some of that stuff. And I'm not saying that I disagree or agree with any of those things. I just felt that it was interesting that you'll hear one conversation that says you should never let the flag touch the ground. Don't ever let the flag become ripped or torn or dirty. And then you'll see the flag printed on a koozie with beer and, boxer briefs or boots that get dirty. And it's hard to wrap my head around some of the rules and the expectations of these like national beliefs and philosophies with images and motifs like the flag, and just that triadic palette of red, white, and blue, and where the power of those three colors and what they can mean to different people at different times. So I just thought all of that stuff was really fascinating to kind of just bring together into one painting and see what could happen. And that was sort of the premise of this painting. There was no sketch, there was no overarching composition or concept. It was really just like, hey, I'm going to start with, I think I started with this form right here. And then everything else just sort of found its place and found its way into the painting. So the process was very organic and open-ended. And that's something that I know can be super rewarding and gratifying when you allow your process to be open to a lot of possibilities, and taking chances and just trying something and then deciding if it works, So in grad school at this time, right after I'd finished my second year of grad school, the program I was in really is focusing your curriculum and your interactions with the faculty, your interactions with your peers towards your last year, right? It's like everything culminates to that third year of the program where you produce your thesis project and you write your thesis, and you take all the things you've learned and you distill it into something of progress and of substance and of even just becoming the like platform that you want to build off of after school, right? Like, what does that platform look like for you, and what are the ideas that are relevant in your work and your process? So all of those pieces are starting to kind of like, weave their way into my creative headspace and my process. And I felt really good at that point. I think going into my third year, I was starting to kind of foresee a little bit of the project that I wanted my thesis work to center on, and starting to ask some questions that were leading me towards a direction that I felt very optimistic about and very happy with. And I'll talk more about that context and those events in the next live stream, which is probably going to be in a few days. Part of what I'm doing right now with the live streams is trying to turn back the clock and give some context to the trajectory of my work, whether that's the studio side of my practice or the plein air side of my practice. I have a lot more work to share for the studio side, so that's why I'm starting on that part of my portfolio. But this is an opportunity to give anyone who's curious about my work some context behind the process, the ideas, where I was living at the time, the interactions I had, the kind of inspirations that fed my practice at that time. So if you've been watching either of the live streams so far, I hope you'll come back and watch the third stream that's going to happen here in the next couple of days, which will carry us right off of this particular painting that I remember showing in the start of the fall semester of my last year in grad school. So as I mentioned, I produced this painting in the summer, kind of into the fall of 2019. And I remember I had stretched and finished the painting for an exhibition in the Kresge Art Center my third year of the program. There was kind of a group MFA candidate show that we had that I kind of first brought this painting out into an exhibition space with. And yeah, it was a really fun way to begin my third year of grad school and start to prepare for my third year of the program. And before I let you go, I guess I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what I'll talk about in the next video. So my next portfolio that I'll go through is 2020 through 2021. And as I mentioned earlier in the live stream, my MFA candidacy ended in the spring semester of 2020, which, as we all know, was when the pandemic really kind of started. So I was one of the students that graduated right as the global pandemic kind of went into effect. And that was a very strange and surreal experience. And as you maybe will be able to tell now after watching some of the live streams, the amount of preparation and work that kind of builds to that final year and that final semester as a grad student created a very high expectation for me and what that experience was going to become with my thesis show and graduating. And so to have that sort of clouded by the COVID pandemic was a very strange thing to make sense of and grapple with. And anyway, that's some of what I'll probably be talking about in the next live stream, which I'm really excited to share with you. It is now just about 2.5 hours, just over 2.5 hours of the live stream, which is a lot of time. So if you watched this entire thing either live with me or after it was recorded, thank you for sticking it out. Thanks for spending so much of your personal time with my work and my process and my studio practice. Again, my name is Hector Acuna. If you'd like to visit my website, I have my website URL, right here on the screen. You can type that in. I think you can also get to it from my YouTube profile or in the comments or the description of this particular video. If you have any questions about anything that was shown or talked about in the video, feel free to add those in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you had a favorite painting that I talked about or a moment in a painting that really stuck out to you, or made you think about something, or you related to something I said, I'm always excited to see those types of comments and to engage with that side of the experience. So that's all I have to share. If you don't already follow me online, you can find me on Instagram at Hector Acuna Studio. You can also check out my plein air portfolio on Instagram, which is Hector Acuna plein air. If you're not subscribed already on YouTube, I'll ask that you please subscribe. If you like this video, if you want to support my channel, leaving a thumbs up or sharing the video is always helpful with the algorithm and that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really enjoying recording these live streams, even if they're not watched by a lot of people. It's fun for me to go back in time and document what was happening and how the paintings came to be. So stick around for the next one. I have some other videos that are coming up on my channel too for the 30 by 30 by 30 series. So if you haven't seen that series yet, please go check out my channel. You can watch those videos that have been really fun for me to document and share. And otherwise, stay tuned. Thanks again to everybody who checked it out. Big thanks to my brother Tony, who tuned in for the live stream. So thanks, Tony, for checking it out. Thanks for watching. That's it for the video. I'll see you guys in the next one, and have a great day.